Some lessons cost more than a badge can afford. The late afternoon sun hung low over Highway 41 just outside Birmingham, Alabama, painting the asphalt in shades of gold and orange as commuters made their way home after another long workday. Traffic moved steadily, a stream of pickup trucks, family SUVs, and delivery vans stretching for miles. Behind the wheel of a dark gray Cadillac Escalade, Marcus Reed drove calmly, one hand resting on the steering wheel while soft jazz played through the speakers. At 38 years old, Marcus had built a respectable life for himself. He owned a growing construction company, employed dozens of local workers, and spent most of his time focused on providing opportunities for people in his community. This evening should have been ordinary. It should have been forgettable. But sometimes a single decision can change the course of multiple lives. A flash of red and blue lights suddenly appeared in Marcus's rearview mirror. He glanced at his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. He checked his lane position. Everything was normal. Still, the patrol car remained behind him, lights flashing. Marcus let out a quiet breath and carefully guided his vehicle onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as he brought the SUV to a stop. Cars continued rushing past, their drivers stealing curious glances at the scene unfolding beside the highway. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out of the patrol car. Tall, broad-shouldered, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, Ryan adjusted his duty belt and approached the driver's side window. Marcus lowered the glass and offered a polite nod. "Good afternoon, officer." Ryan barely acknowledged the greeting. His eyes swept across the interior of the SUV before settling on Marcus. "License and registration." Marcus complied immediately, retrieving the documents and handing them over. Ryan looked at them for only a moment before glancing back at the vehicle. "Nice ride," he said. The words sounded less like a compliment and more like an accusation. Marcus remained calm. "Thank you." Ryan smirked. "Must be doing pretty well for yourself." The silence that followed felt heavier than the summer air. Marcus recognized the tone. He had heard it before. The implication hidden beneath a simple sentence. Ryan took a step back and looked over the vehicle again as if searching for a reason to justify the stop. Passing drivers slowed slightly, curious about what was happening. A few raised their phones. "Step out of the vehicle," Ryan said. Marcus blinked. "May I ask why?" Ryan's expression hardened. "I'm asking the questions." Marcus nodded slowly and exited the SUV. The warm breeze carried the distant sound of traffic while several bystanders watched from a nearby gas station parking lot. Ryan continued speaking loudly enough for others to hear. "Funny how people always have a story when things don't add up." Marcus kept his composure. He refused to argue. He refused to give Ryan what he seemed to want. Yet with every passing second, the attention around them grew. More eyes turned toward the shoulder of the highway. More phones appeared. More witnesses began recording. Ryan thought he was controlling the moment. What he didn't realize was that this traffic stop had already become something much bigger than either man standing beside that road could see. And before the sun disappeared below the Alabama horizon, the first pieces of a costly lesson were already falling into place. Marcus stood beside the Escalade while the warm Alabama wind drifted across the shoulder of the highway. The setting sun cast long shadows across the pavement, and the flashing patrol lights painted brief streaks of red and blue across the passing traffic. Officer Ryan Mitchell slowly circled the vehicle, studying it as though he had already reached a conclusion and was merely looking for evidence to support it. Marcus kept his hands visible and his posture relaxed. Years of experience had taught him that remaining calm often mattered more than proving a point. Ryan glanced toward the growing number of people watching from the nearby gas station. Several had their phones raised. Some were quietly speaking among themselves. The attention seemed to bother him. He returned to Marcus and crossed his arms. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "A business meeting," Marcus answered. "And where are you headed?" "Downtown Birmingham." Ryan narrowed his eyes. That is a pretty expensive vehicle for a construction contractor. Marcus paused for a moment before replying. My company has done well. Ryan gave a short laugh that carried no humor. Sure. The word hung in the air. Marcus noticed a young couple standing near the gas station entrance. They were watching closely. A delivery driver had also stopped pumping gas and turned his attention toward the roadside scene. The longer the stop continued, the more people seemed drawn to it. Ryan requested additional information over his radio and then returned to questioning Marcus. The questions became repetitive. The same topics. The same doubts. The same implication that Marcus had somehow done something wrong simply by being there. Yet Marcus answered each one politely. He refused to raise his voice. He refused to argue. He refused to become the person Ryan seemed determined to find. Minutes passed. The traffic stop that should have taken only a short time stretched longer and longer. Drivers slowed as they passed. Some pointed. Others recorded. A few shook their heads before continuing down the highway. Marcus could feel the weight of their eyes, but he kept his focus forward. Then Ryan asked a question that made several nearby witnesses glance at one another. Is this vehicle actually yours? Marcus looked directly at him. Yes, officer. It is registered in my name. Ryan examined the registration again even though he had already done so earlier. The answer was sitting in his hands. Still, he seemed unwilling to accept it. For the first time, Marcus noticed something else beneath the officer's confidence. Frustration. Every document matched. Every answer remained consistent. Every attempt to create suspicion was quietly falling apart. The silence between them grew uncomfortable. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn echoed across the highway. The evening sky deepened into shades of orange and purple. What Ryan did not realize was that the cameras surrounding him were capturing more than a traffic stop. They were capturing a pattern. A tone. A series of choices. And somewhere among the growing crowd, one witness had already begun saving every second of footage. Before the night was over, those recordings would travel far beyond the shoulder of Highway 41, reaching people Ryan had never expected to hear about this encounter. The atmosphere along Highway 41 shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. What had started as a routine stop had become a public spectacle. More vehicles slowed as they passed. People standing near the gas station continued watching from a distance, their attention fixed on the roadside scene illuminated by the flashing patrol lights. Marcus Reed stood quietly beside his vehicle, maintaining the same calm composure he had shown from the beginning. His patience seemed almost unusual under the circumstances. Many people would have argued. Many would have demanded answers. Marcus did neither. He simply stood there, speaking respectfully whenever he was addressed. Yet that calmness appeared to frustrate Officer Ryan Mitchell even more. Ryan glanced toward the gathering crowd and noticed several phones pointed in his direction. He straightened his posture immediately. For a brief moment, uncertainty crossed his face. Then it disappeared behind the confident expression he had worn all evening. You seem awfully comfortable for someone being investigated, Ryan said. Marcus met his gaze. I have answered every question you asked, officer. The response was simple. Respectful. Difficult to challenge. A murmur spread through a small group standing near the gas station entrance. Some exchanged looks. Others continued recording. One older man quietly shook his head and folded his arms across his chest. The evening air felt heavier now. The sun had nearly disappeared below the horizon, leaving streaks of purple and orange across the Alabama sky. Highway noise blended with the distant hum of conversations from curious bystanders. Ryan looked down at the paperwork once again. Every document remained valid. Every detail checked out. There was nothing unusual about Marcus or the vehicle. Yet the stop continued. The longer it lasted, the more uncomfortable the scene became. A young mother walking toward the convenience store stopped beside her car. Her son, no older than 8, looked toward Marcus and then toward the officer. "Mom," he asked quietly, "what did that man do?" She hesitated. The question seemed simple, but no answer came. After several seconds, she simply said, "I do not know." The boy continued staring. Marcus heard the exchange. So did Ryan. For the first time, the silence that followed felt louder than any words. Across the parking lot, another witness uploaded a short video clip to social media. Then another. Within minutes, the footage began circulating far beyond the highway. People who had never visited Alabama were already watching pieces of the encounter unfold on their screens. They saw a businessman standing calmly beside his vehicle. They saw an officer continuing a stop that appeared to have no clear direction. They saw questions being asked and answered. And they began asking questions of their own. Back on the roadside, Ryan finally received a message through his radio. He listened carefully. His expression tightened. The response contained nothing that supported his suspicions. Nothing. Marcus watched quietly as the officer looked away for a moment. It was the first crack in the confidence Ryan had displayed all evening. But the real shift was happening somewhere else. The crowd was no longer watching Marcus. They were watching Ryan. And without realizing it, the officer who believed he controlled the situation had slowly become the center of attention himself. Several miles away from the highway, inside a conference center overlooking downtown Birmingham, rows of empty chairs sat beneath bright ceiling lights. A large digital screen displayed the logo of a community development initiative that had taken nearly 3 years to organize. City officials, nonprofit leaders, local business owners, and neighborhood representatives had gathered for what many considered a landmark event. One seat near the front remained empty. The name card on the table read Marcus Reed. Earlier that afternoon, Marcus had been scheduled to deliver the opening presentation. He was expected to announce a major investment that would create new jobs, fund apprenticeship programs, and support small businesses in underserved neighborhoods across the city. Months of preparation had gone into the project. Contracts had been reviewed. Partnerships had been negotiated. Community leaders had spent countless hours preparing for this moment. Yet as the clock continued moving forward, the empty seat remained empty. Organizers attempted to call Marcus several times. Each call went unanswered. The meeting eventually began without him, but the energy inside the room felt noticeably different. People exchanged worried glances. Questions circulated quietly among the attendees. No one understood why a man known for his reliability had suddenly disappeared. Back on Highway 41, Marcus still stood beside his vehicle while Officer Ryan Mitchell struggled to justify a stop that had long ago exceeded any reasonable explanation. The contrast could not have been greater. On one side of the city, important decisions affecting hundreds of families were being delayed. On the other side, a growing crowd watched an officer continue a situation that should have already ended. Among those watching was a woman named Sarah Collins. Standing near the edge of the gas station parking lot, she remained calm as she observed everything unfolding before her. Sarah was a civil rights attorney with more than a decade of experience handling cases involving discrimination and misconduct. She had stopped for gas while traveling home from Montgomery and happened to witness the traffic stop from the beginning. Unlike many of the other bystanders, Sarah was paying attention to details. She noted the timeline. She noted the questions. She noted how the interaction changed whenever additional witnesses appeared nearby. Most importantly, she recorded everything. Not just short clips. Not isolated moments. Everything. Her phone remained steady as she documented each passing minute. Experience had taught her that context often mattered more than any single statement. As darkness slowly settled across the highway, Sarah uploaded backup copies of the footage to a secure cloud account. Then she continued recording. Nearby, other witnesses were doing the same. Different angles. Different perspectives. Different devices. What Ryan still failed to recognize was that the story was no longer being told by one person. It was being documented by dozens. Meanwhile, social media activity surrounding the incident continued growing. More people shared the clips. More comments appeared. More questions emerged. Who was the driver? Why had the stop lasted so long? Why did the officer continue questioning someone whose documents had already been verified? The answers had not arrived yet. But the attention was spreading faster than anyone on that roadside could imagine. And before the night ended, the consequences of a single traffic stop would begin reaching places far beyond Highway 41. By the time the traffic stop finally came to an end, the sky above Birmingham had turned dark. The flashing lights disappeared from the shoulder of Highway 41, and the crowd slowly drifted away. Marcus Reed returned to his vehicle and sat quietly behind the wheel for several moments before starting the engine. The silence inside the Escalade felt strange after hours of questions, attention, and uncertainty. His phone immediately lit up with missed calls and messages. There were dozens. Business partners. Community leaders. Event organizers. City officials. The meeting he had spent months preparing for had already ended. Opportunities that could have changed lives had been delayed. Marcus stared at the screen and exhaled slowly. He was frustrated, but not surprised. He had learned long ago that some losses could not be measured in dollars. Some losses were measured in trust, timing, and moments that never returned. Across the city, Sarah Collins sat at her kitchen table reviewing the footage she had recorded. What she saw confirmed the feeling she had experienced while standing at the gas station. The recordings told a complete story. Every question. Every pause. Every unnecessary extension of the stop. More importantly, her footage was not the only evidence. Within hours, additional videos began appearing online. One camera from the gas station parking lot captured the interaction from a wide angle. Another recording from a passing driver showed a different perspective. Then something unexpected surfaced. A nearby service station shared security footage covering part of the roadside. The images were distant but clear enough to establish an accurate timeline. Sarah carefully compared the videos. Minute by minute. Frame by frame. The result was impossible to ignore. The timeline showed that Marcus had cooperated fully from the very beginning. It showed that his documents were valid. It showed that the stop continued long after the original purpose had been resolved. As midnight approached, several local journalists began contacting witnesses. One reporter obtained copies of multiple videos and assembled them into a single sequence. The next morning, the story exploded. News stations across Alabama began airing segments about the incident. Online commentators debated what had happened. Community organizations requested explanations. Public pressure grew with every passing hour. Meanwhile, inside the police department, supervisors found themselves answering uncomfortable questions. Internal emails circulated rapidly. Administrators requested reports. Command staff reviewed footage. What initially appeared to be a minor roadside encounter was becoming something much larger. Officer Ryan Mitchell watched the coverage from his living room. At first, he believed the attention would fade. Incidents came and went all the time. Public interest rarely lasted. But as new footage continued appearing, his confidence began to weaken. Every additional video removed another layer of uncertainty. Every new angle reinforced the same narrative. What he had assumed was a private exercise of authority had become a public record. And somewhere within hundreds of hours of newly submitted evidence, one particular video was about to emerge. A recording that neither Ryan nor anyone else had known existed. A recording that would change everything people thought they knew about what happened on Highway 41 that evening. 3 weeks later, the attention surrounding the incident had not faded. If anything, it had intensified. Reporters continued investigating. Community groups demanded accountability. Local officials found themselves answering questions they could no longer ignore. Inside the Jefferson County Courthouse, preparations were underway for the first major hearing connected to the case. The building itself carried the familiar atmosphere of American courtrooms. Polished floors reflected the overhead lights. Conversations echoed softly through hallways lined with framed photographs and decades of legal history. On the morning of the hearing, every seat in the gallery filled quickly. Journalists arrived carrying notebooks and cameras. Residents from across Birmingham gathered quietly. Some came because they had seen the videos. Others came because they believed the case represented something larger than a single traffic stop. Marcus Reed entered the courtroom wearing a dark navy suit and a calm expression. He greeted his attorneys, exchanged a few words with Sarah Collins, and then took his seat. Although the past several weeks had been difficult, he remained composed. The frustration he felt was real, but so was his determination to let the facts speak for themselves. Across the room, Officer Ryan Mitchell sat beside legal counsel provided through his department. The confidence he had displayed on Highway 41 was noticeably diminished. Every time another camera lens turned toward him, his shoulders seemed to tighten slightly. The courtroom doors opened and closed as additional spectators entered. A low murmur filled the room. Then everything fell silent when the judge took the bench. The hearing began with routine procedural matters. Dates were reviewed. Evidence was discussed. Witness lists were introduced. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Then Marcus's legal team presented something no one had expected. The previously unknown recording had finally surfaced. Weeks earlier, a regional trucking company had discovered archived footage from a commercial vehicle that happened to travel through the area during the stop. The camera had recorded continuously from a unique angle that none of the other videos captured. Unlike the clips already circulating online, this footage showed the entire sequence from beginning to end without interruption. The screen inside the courtroom illuminated. Every eye turned toward it. The recording played in complete silence. Minute after minute passed. The camera documented the timing of every interaction, every question, every delay. It confirmed details that had previously been disputed. It established a clear chronology. Most importantly, it removed nearly all uncertainty regarding how long the encounter continued after the original purpose of the stop had been resolved. When the video ended, the room remained silent. Even the reporters stopped typing for a moment. The impact was immediate. Not because the footage contained anything dramatic, but because it was so complete. It told the story without emotion. Without commentary. Without interpretation. Just facts. Sarah Collins glanced toward Marcus. He remained still. Ryan stared at the defense table, avoiding the eyes of the spectators. For the first time since the hearing began, the balance inside the courtroom had shifted. The conversation was no longer about opinions. It was about evidence. And as attorneys prepared to introduce the next phase of their case, a deeper question was beginning to emerge. If this stop had unfolded exactly as the recording suggested, was it truly an isolated incident, or was it part of something much larger waiting to be uncovered? The atmosphere inside the courtroom felt different after the footage was shown. The questions were no longer centered on what happened that evening. The recordings had already answered most of those. Now the focus shifted towards something far more troubling. Marcus Reed's legal team stood and introduced a series of documents obtained through public records requests. Thick folders were placed on the evidence table. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at the growing stack. Across the room, reporters leaned forward in their seats. Sarah Collins watched quietly, her expression unreadable. The lead attorney began with a simple statement. This case is not only about one traffic stop. The words seemed to settle over the room like a storm cloud. One by one, additional records appeared on the courtroom screens. Complaints. Internal reviews. Citizen reports. Most had never resulted. Informal discipline. Many had been dismissed. Some had remained unresolved for years. Viewed individually, they appeared insignificant. Viewed together, they revealed something impossible to ignore. A pattern. The attorney carefully walked through the timeline. Different years. Different locations. Different drivers. Yet similarities appeared again and again. Extended stops. Repeated questioning. Complaints regarding treatment that several individuals described in remarkably similar ways. The courtroom remained silent. Then the first witness was called. An older business owner from Birmingham stepped forward and took the stand. He described an encounter that had occurred nearly 4 years earlier. Next came a delivery driver. Then a retired military veteran. Each person spoke calmly. None appeared interested in revenge. None raised their voice. They simply described experiences that shared striking similarities with what had happened to Marcus. As the testimony continued, Ryan Mitchell sat motionless. The confident officer who once controlled the roadside encounter seemed increasingly isolated inside the courtroom. His attorneys attempted to challenge portions of the testimony, but the larger picture was becoming difficult to dismiss. Every witness added another piece to the puzzle. Every document reinforced the emerging narrative. Even more surprising was what investigators discovered while reviewing department records. Several complaints that had previously been considered unrelated suddenly appeared connected when viewed together. Independent reviewers began re-examining old files. Supervisors were asked difficult questions. Administrative decisions made years earlier were now receiving fresh scrutiny. The consequences stretched beyond one officer. They reached into policies, procedures, and oversight practices that few people had questioned before. Marcus listened quietly from his seat. He had never intended to become the face of a larger issue. He simply wanted accountability for what happened to him. Yet as witness after witness spoke, he realized the case had become something much bigger than a single evening on Highway 41. The judge called for a brief recess. Conversations immediately erupted throughout the gallery. Reporters hurried into the hallway to file updates. Spectators exchanged stunned looks. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared silently at the evidence screens. And as Ryan remained seated at the defense table, one fact became impossible to escape. The traffic stop that began with one driver and one officer had uncovered a history that no one expected. Now the courtroom faced a question far more significant than who was right or wrong on a single night. The real question was how many warning signs had been ignored before the truth finally reached this room. The final phase of the case arrived on a cold Thursday morning. Long before the courthouse doors opened, people had already gathered outside. News vans lined the street. Reporters adjusted cameras beneath gray skies. Community leaders stood beside local residents, all waiting to learn how the proceedings would end. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt heavier than ever. Weeks of testimony, evidence, and investigation had led to this moment. Every seat in the gallery was occupied. The silence carried a weight that words could not describe. Marcus Reed sat calmly beside his legal team. He looked much the same as he had on the night everything began. Composed. Patient. Focused. Across the room, Ryan Mitchell appeared exhausted. The confidence that once defined him had been replaced by uncertainty. The evidence presented throughout the hearings had transformed public perception. More importantly, it had forced officials to examine issues that had remained hidden for years. The judge entered the courtroom and everyone rose. After several procedural remarks, the ruling began. The decision addressed far more than a single traffic stop. The court concluded that the encounter had been improperly extended despite the absence of facts supporting continued suspicion. The ruling also referenced the extensive documentation presented during the hearings, including witness testimony, video evidence, and departmental records. As the judge continued reading, the room remained completely silent. Every sentence seemed to carry greater significance than the last. The court ordered compensation for damages related to the incident and its consequences. But that was only part of the decision. Independent review boards had already completed parallel investigations. Their findings triggered administrative actions that extended beyond the courtroom itself. Ryan Mitchell was officially removed from active duty. Additional reviews were ordered regarding prior complaints and supervisory decisions connected to his record. Training procedures would be re-evaluated. Oversight measures would be strengthened. Reporting requirements would be expanded. What began as one evening beside a highway was now driving changes throughout the department. Reporters immediately began taking notes. Spectators exchanged stunned glances. Some quietly nodded. Others simply stared ahead, processing what they had heard. The ruling was not dramatic. There were no emotional outbursts. No shouting. No celebration. Instead, there was something far more powerful. Accountability. The kind built through facts, patience, and persistence. Marcus listened carefully as the final portions of the decision were read. When it was over, he remained seated for several seconds. The journey that brought him here had cost time, opportunities, and peace of mind. Yet the outcome represented something larger than personal vindication. It represented proof that evidence still mattered. That truth could survive scrutiny. That patience could accomplish what anger never could. Around the courtroom, people slowly began standing. Conversations resumed. Journalists rushed toward the exits to file their stories. Outside, headlines were already being prepared. But inside the courtroom, one reality had become impossible to ignore. The consequences of a single decision had reached farther than anyone imagined. And the lesson delivered that day would not be measured by money, policies, or headlines alone. It would be measured by the reminder that authority carries responsibility, and when that responsibility is forgotten, the truth eventually finds its way into the light. The courthouse steps were nearly empty by the time Marcus Reed walked outside. The crowds that had gathered throughout the day were beginning to disperse, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the stone plaza. Reporters remained nearby, waiting for final comments, but Marcus did not rush toward the microphones. He paused for a moment and looked across the city skyline. Months earlier, his life had been moving in a completely different direction. His focus had been on building opportunities, creating jobs, and helping neighborhoods that too often felt forgotten. Then one evening changed everything. Not because of what happened on the side of a highway, but because of what happened afterward. The decision to remain calm. The decision to trust the truth. The decision to keep moving forward when it would have been easier to walk away. Sarah Collins stepped outside shortly after and joined him near the bottom of the courthouse stairs. For several seconds neither of them spoke. They simply watched people leaving the building. Families. Journalists. Attorneys. Community leaders. Individuals whose lives had briefly intersected because of a case that became larger than anyone expected. "You did more than win a case," Sarah finally said. Marcus shook his head gently. "The evidence did that." The response sounded simple, but it carried the weight of everything they had experienced. Across Birmingham, conversations about accountability continued. Police leadership announced reforms. Community meetings were scheduled. Independent oversight recommendations moved forward. The changes would not solve every problem overnight. Marcus understood that. Real progress rarely happened that way. But for the first time in a long time, many people felt their concerns had been heard. In the months that followed, the community development project Marcus had missed finally moved forward. New partnerships were formed. Construction began on several initiatives that would create opportunities for hundreds of local families. The delayed meeting that once felt like a devastating setback eventually became a reminder that important goals can survive unexpected obstacles. Life slowly returned to normal. Yet some moments remained unforgettable. Sometimes Marcus would drive along Highway 41 and pass the same stretch of road where everything began. The shoulder looked ordinary. Cars continued moving past without a second thought. Most people would never know what happened there. But Marcus remembered. Not with bitterness. Not with anger. With perspective. Because the most powerful lesson had never been about one officer, one courtroom, or one ruling. It was about dignity. About refusing to let someone else's assumptions define who you are. About understanding that character reveals itself most clearly when circumstances become difficult. As the sun began to set beyond the Birmingham skyline, Marcus finally approached the waiting reporters. Cameras turned toward him. Microphones were raised. Everyone expected a dramatic statement. Instead, he offered a few quiet words. "Respect costs nothing," he said. "But when respect is forgotten, the price can become greater than anyone expects." Then he thanked the community, turned, and walked away. The story that started with suspicion ended with accountability. The story that began with humiliation ended with dignity. And long after the headlines disappeared, one truth remained. A badge can represent authority. A courtroom can deliver justice. But in the end, it is character that reveals who truly carries power.